Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We had a little difficulties bringing our speaker into the conference today, but now we're getting started with the TD 6.1 webinar, Advanced Business Charting. Your host is Martin Thies, and your speaker will be Helmut Reimann. Helmut is an experienced TD professional. He has more than 10 years experience with TD programming and has done many TD 6.1 and TD.NET projects. So I'd like to pass over control to Helmut now to show us how advanced business charting can be done with Team Developer 6.1. I'm passing control over, change role to presenter.
Okay. So my presentation today is about business charting. And excuse me, so here we are. So in the last releases and service packs, we implemented a lot of new, very useful features inside Team Developer 6.1. And it is an ongoing process.
We're not seeing your screen.
Well, I forgot to share my screen. Excuse me. Where are you? Well, share my desktop.
Yeah.
Here we go. Excuse me. So, hopefully you can now see my screen. I apologize for technical problems. So Microsoft, my browser had a problem to launch all the WebEx stuff. So now I'm on Firefox. It works very well. Okay. Again, advanced charting. We implemented a lot of new features inside Team Developer 6.1 in service packs because we have an ongoing process and talking to people and implementing new stuff inside the charting control because we have to replace it because the old quick graph control is no longer valid for Unicode. So we had to replace it in a very short time. So today I want to talk a little bit about the charting concept, about replacement of quick graph. So we want to have a look into the property control and property dialogues because we added a lot of new features inside this dialog, but also we added a few new API calls so that you can do all the nice settings really very dynamically, not only during the setup time of the charting. So I want to talk about zooming and scrolling inside chart controls. And one very good point is we want to talk about the multi-chart container because this is a very, very useful tool that you can use inside your application to split charts, different graphs into different sections of your chart control. Also, we included labeling customer-defined lines. That means you can define special labels to user-defined lines to give the end user the possibility, what is the name of the line, what does it represent at this point. Then we have a new placeholder graph. This placeholder graph is used if you have a lot of data points to view, and maybe you can dig into the data because you have thousands of data points, and so we have a placeholder graph, and you can define a special set of placeholder graph to display special replacement. That means a replacement graph that you can use to display more information. Then sometimes we have gaps in graph series. That means there's a number null in an array, and you have to decide what you want to do. And also for the point markers, you will see you can mark special points inside your graph with special markers to give more overview, to give really the end user the feeling he can really dig into the graph and he sees immediately this is something was going wrong. So let's start. The Quick Graph API is still valid. So if you're on the way to migrate your applications from Team Developer 1.5.1 to maybe 4.2 or 6.1, then you can use the Quick Graph API. So if API is still valid, you don't have to change source code inside your application. What we do, we read all the properties in the binary section of your source code, and we set this into the new and replace it into the new charting language. So the old properties are reused. And we have a new default property dialog, and you should look into this property dialog because, for example, you can set up special zooming factors and so on. At this point, you have to maybe to set it to non-scrolling, non-zooming, because maybe on default, after 50 data points inside your arrays, inside your graph, the control will automatically start with zooming. So then you have to look into this property dialog to switch it off. So this is a sample, and you can see I marked an area, zoom and scroll. So at this point, after 200 points, so if you have 201 points, then the charting controls start to zoom. That means we have 5% of the range. We start at the beginning with the zoom bar and the 20% of the end range. So if you want to switch it off, then it makes sense to have this. If you don't want to use the API, then it makes sense to have this threshold to maybe 2,000 or 5,000 points, so that automatically all zooming is switched off. The same for the data sampling. At this point, data sampling is switched on if you want to use more than or if you have 200 and more data values inside your arrays. At this point, you will see only in the replacement graph a placeholder. That means keep extremes. So you will see only the extremes of the graph. So if you don't want to use it, then you have to set up this value, or you have to use an API call to switch this off. So new features in chart control I mentioned is an ongoing project. Normally we don't ship new features inside the service pack, but we are working very close with one of our customers, and they replaced the quick graph control, and the quick graph was very, very powerful. And they implemented the new chart control, and we found out that a few things are missing, or very special situations came up, like we want to align a special y-axis, or we want to have a special grouping, and we need labels, and we want to mark some points and so on. And at least if you asked, Service Pack 3 for Team Developer 6.1 is coming very soon. So I talked to our support engineering team. So maybe in the next days you can use Service Pack 3 and you can download Service Pack 3 for Team Developer 6.1. So let's have a look into the zooming and scrolling API. So all the normally property settings can also be done by using chart set controls or set API stuff, like set zoom scroll. So what you have to pass is the window handle of the charting control, the threshold. That means enable zooming and scrolling if the number of data points is greater than this number. So if it's set to 50 and if 49 values inside the data points, then you will never see this zoom and scroll bar. But if you have 51 points, then it automatically will be started, and you can start the scrolling and zooming inside your charting control. The zooming min zoom range is the percentage what you want to see. So if you type in, or if you define 0.1, then the charting control will display 10% of the whole series. So if you want to have 20%, then you have to type in 0.2, then you get 20% of the data values displayed. So it's pretty simple, 10%, that means a zoom range by 10 times. The start range is very useful. So you can define, for example, if you want to start with zooming at the beginning of the chart, or if you want to start at the middle or at the end, or somewhere in the middle. That means if you type in, you want to start at 0.5, that means at the middle of the charting area, then you can define it range end, maybe it's 1, then you will see the last 50% of your data values. So if you start with 0 and 0.5, the scroll bar will start at the beginning of the chart. And mode means determines the mode of the scrolling with following values. So if you want to decide, I want to switch off the scrolling, then you have to type in scroll mode none. It's a global constant value. At this point, you can switch it by default off for all the charting, so you don't have to use the property dialog. So if you have scroll only, then It is you can only scroll through the data values and through the charts and graphs. And if you switch on scroll and zoom, then you can use your mouse and you can dig very deep into the data by creating areas inside your charting area. So it looks like this. So this API call, I switch it on with a special Boolean variable. I use UFC chart set zoom scroll for a special control. After 5 points, I want to show this scroll bar, and I want to display 10% of the, also 10 times, zooming factor of 10 times. The third parameter is 0. That means at this point, I want to start at the beginning of the control, and 0.5 means the scroll bar ends at the middle of the scroll bar, of the dialog. So scroll mode, scroll and zoom means I can scroll and I can show more or less data points with this settings. Defining chart areas is a very, very useful thing. I saw a lot of very, very complex graphs, and sometimes you have very, very small values and very, let's say, high values, 1,000, 2,000, and data points lower than 10. Then you have maybe very flat graphs, and you have maybe a very high graph, and you have none or unused areas in your chart control. With the chart at chart area, then you can add special additional chart areas inside the charting control. So the parameter list is pretty simple. You have to pass the window handle for the chart control, and you have to define a height of this new area inside this chart control. At this point, the height is in inch. So if to define a new charting area or painting area in your chart control, you can use set an area 1. So this is the index of this area. UFC chart at stacked chart area for the charting control 1 and 2.0 or 2.1. Then you get a new drawing area inside this charting control. This is the first step what you have to do. The second step is you have to set this new area as a current chart area, because maybe you want to add additional API calls, you want to set additional properties for this charting area. So at this point, you see chart set current chart area with the second parameter of the index will now activate this new charting or painting area inside your charting control. So this is a code schnipsel. Like I want to have multiple charts. So I define a new area 1, use the chart at stacked area with a 2 inch of height in inches. Then I make it current with the set current chart area. I pass as the second parameter the new ID of this area. And then I can do additional things like with the chart set axis Y label width or legend width to align the y-axis, or to do additional things to pass information, maybe change some values, create colored zones for the different chart areas. So at this point, you have one control and the possibility to have more than one charting area, painting area inside this chart control. Resizing drawing area. The problem is we have different formats for y-axis labels. We have different y-axis label sizes, like different formats, sorry, and fonts and so on. And maybe we use grouping of data, so we have additional y-axis at the right-hand side of the chart. That means this grouping needs more space as a normal legend on the right-hand side, or maybe you have long text as a legend. Then you have to define special drawing areas. So this is pretty simple done. This is one of the possible problems. We have now 3 drawing areas. So all this, what you can see here, is one charting area. This is one control. And we have now 1, 2, 3 different chart areas. We have group data with different y-axis, because we have values up to 310, up to 155, or up to 10. So you can see we can mix it with different y-axis. And maybe we have a legend, a visible legend and we can scroll through a region, and maybe we have only one additional y-axis, or we have non-additional y-axis. Maybe we have different fonts at the beginning because of the different size of the values. Or you want to mark special charting areas with a special font and so on, then maybe your chart looks like that. So it's not a good point, because if you want to scroll and if you want to zoom, then you get in big trouble. It looks not very nice, and the y-axis is not really in one line. So that's why we implemented two new functions. The first API call for that is use the chart set axis y label width. So we create space at this point 1.5 inches to display all the labels for the y-axis. And we define a legend size in this point 1.2 inches to display the legends. So the first parameter is the handle of the control, of course, and the second parameter is the size in inches. And this should be done for each drawing area. So it doesn't make sense to define it at the starting of the chart control by defining all the properties, because after a while someone switched on multi-chart, environment, and so on. Then the new chart control area, new painting area, doesn't know about this sizing. At this point, if you create a new charting area, you have to pass this information into the new charting area. Also, labeling customer-defined lines. New customer lines can be labeled with following API calls. First of all, we changed a little bit with the chart at custom line, like Y line and X line, get back an index of this line. So this has a special ID. Each customer line has an ID, and based on this ID, you can set properties like this label. So this is a limit for the y-axis. Yeah, you have the font and font size and the font properties, and also for the custom line for X. So we have a line again, and at this point we have a green line and we have a solid line. But based on this line ID, we can now write a label on this axis or on this user-defined line. So this is this one. Data sampling. This is a pretty cool problem, and we found out that users use thousands of values, and they should be displayed in a graph. But the graph is only maybe 3 or 4 inches of space. So at the least, we have a blue area or a red area, because no one can dig into this chart or into the graph. Now you can do a data sampling. That means you create a temporary graph to display special values. So you can configure this temporary graph, and then you can use the zoom features inside the charting control to dig into this graph to display the real values. So the API for the data sampling is pretty simple. You see chart set sampling, then you have the threshold and function. Threshold is the max number of data points. That means you will see, maybe if you set it to 50, then you will see a graph, the original graph, up to 50 points. If you have 51 points, then the chart will automatically create the sampling, so the replacement graph for this chart, for this graph. So as I showed previously, we have property settings inside the dialog, and the property settings of this chart control. And the problem is, if it is set to 200 and you want to display 200 points, maybe 210 points, then you will see the replacement graph because no one checked this default settings inside the property dialog. So it makes sense again to set this at the beginning of the chart features and the functions and API calls to set the sampling area. So it looks like this one as the placeholder for a graph. So at this point, we have around 300 data points. And believe me, if you want to display a graph with 300 data points of this size, you will see nothing. It's only a blue area, but now it is set to extremes. but you will see there are extreme. You have peaks inside this graph, and then you can use the zooming features for this graph control to dig into these areas. So you can use the mouse, and if you look into these areas, then you will see the original point and the original graph file. So this makes sense and is very useful. The next point, gaps in a graph. So maybe, as you know, you pass the data values as an array of numbers inside this charting control, and then maybe a few values are number null because they're not filled or something was not correct, and you can decide how you want to display these gaps inside the graph. So with UC set series empty point behavior, you can define a special index. That means the index of the data series, because maybe you have 10 or 20 or 30 different data series inside this charting control to display different different values or different graphs. And the behavior is pretty simple. If you type in 0, then there is no data point, so there's really a gap inside this graph. If you have 1, this is a drop, so we ignore the missing value. And gap, oh, I'm sorry, 0 means go to 0. So number null is now replaced with 0. I'm sorry. So drop means drop the missing value, so ignore this missing value, and 2 means gap. So I'm sorry, mix it up. So gap, again, there's really a gap because this data point is missing. So we display a gap. Empty point means we ignore this missing point, and go to 0 means, okay, we expect this is not number null, it is a 0. So we display a graph or replacement graph to 0. As you can see, maybe it's outside the painting area. Point markers can be used to display special points with different markers and colors. Like you want to have a special value, and under this point or this value or special line, user line, then you want to have red triangles. If you want to, if you're over this special value, then you want to display green circles. So you can define an underpoint marker and overpoint mark by passing a special value when should this, for example, marker triangle should be displayed. So maybe you have 3 different areas. One area for the normal values, maybe green areas because you are over a special data value, or red triangles or red values because you are below some settings. So let's have a look into the demo. I start my team developer 6.1. So this sample is working without any database, but we load data from an XML file. I can show this chart. It takes a second because we have to load the assembly for the data chart. Let me close this one. Here we go. So this is now the .NET version of this sample application. So you can switch on the point markers. You can switch on and off the different labels for the statistic lines. And let's have a look into the multiple chart. You can see we have very small values and we have very high levels, and we have an unused charting area. So what we can do is we can switch on the multiple chart areas, and now we have 2 different y-axes with 2 different ranges. And what we can see is now that we have a charting area for this value and we have a charting area for this value. I also used the view sizing functions to create a special space for the y-axis and a special space for the legend environment, the legend area. And now you can see all this are now really aligned at this point. If you look into the gaps, you will see this is now show gap. The behavior is show gap. That means really show me the gap. I can change it by drop this one, close, switch it on. Then this gap will be ignored. The missing point will be ignored. Zoom on is now for both. So the zooming factor is again pretty simple. I can scroll and zoom through this charting area. So it's independent of the number of the charting areas. So I can show more, I can show less. I can use also the mouse to dig into the data values. Zoom off, switches off the zoom. Show sampling. It's again a special value. You can see I have a replacement graph because maybe I have a lot of points. I switched on the replacement for, at this point, for 25 points, but I can change it to 300, whatever, repaint. So if I dig into a special area, then I get the original values. And I can decide I want to have an average, I want to see the extremes, the sum, min, max values, first or last values. So it gives me the possibility to have a replacement graph. But at this point, the user should know if there is no point marker, then it is really a replacement. So every feature is also working on .NET. I change it now to build settings. Okay. Now let's have a look into the dialog chart, into the create chart function. First of all, I do a reset of the chart. I set the grid visible. I set the legend like a marker circle. Then I start first time to create a legend and the label width. That means I have a net new painting area. This is really a net because I need more space for the legend and I need a little bit more space for the Y label X, or the X for the Y X axis. Then set graph. I create a new graph. I can switch on the point markers. At this point, I want to show point markers for the under point mark for a special value in red as a triangle. I want to have this as a marker circle green for the over point markers. I can define some colored zones with some endpoints, starting points, and so on, and different colors. Statistic lines switch on and off. And at this point, I start with zooming. So if the checkbox zoom is set, I got a Boolean variable. It's called zoom. It's true. And then I call the use the chart the zoom and scroll API. Call this control. If I have more than 5 points, I want to show it. So I can change it, or I can do it very dynamically. That means if I have more than 100, then do automatically a zoom. And I switch on scroll mode, scroll and zoom. So at this point, I create a new charting area, a painting area. This area is called an area 1. I make it current, and then I start to set up some properties, like again setting the label width for the y-axis and the legend size. And I can again use this data values and so on, and all this new data series and so on are painted in this new area because it is switched on. Point markers again. So if I want to display point markers, then I can pass this information into the charting control. Color zones again, and zoom, of course, again, I can use a different painting area. But again, if I switch on zoom and I have a multi-chart environment, all environments, all areas are zoomed and scrolled and so on. So they are depending because they are really on one control and they know from each other. So the last point what I want to show is with data sampling. Data sampling is again, I pass information out of this data series, and if an average checkbox is set, then I have a data sampling like 0, and for extremes I get a 1, because I can set this different data samplings, as you saw it, and use the chart set axis y min max values, so I can set up a special range, and the end is maybe I get a lot of points, more than 30, so I can't display this number of points, data points. Then I can switch on the sampling type, so I will see the replacement graph, and I can use also the zoom and so on to dig into this replacement graph, into the sampling graph. So that's it for the brand new features, mostly in Service Pack 3 and a few in Service Pack 2.
Thank you very much, Helmut. This is
Welcome.
a very impressive control. Let me quickly change back control to myself. Well, at this point, I'd like to thank everybody that attended this webinar. We will be making this video recording of this webinar available on YouTube tomorrow. So if you have colleagues that are interested in creating amazing charting applications, then look into the YouTube video, have them look into the YouTube video tomorrow. Thanks again for joining us today. Have a good day, good evening, and hope to meet you very soon again. Thank you and bye-bye.